Good morning. My name is Greg Hale, and I'm the general manager of Logan Telephone Cooperative. I'm here in Carthage, Tennessee today at the office of James L. Bass, and we'll be doing a little interview with Mr. Bass regarding his involvement with NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and its formation, as well as talk about TECO, our Political Action Committee. Um, I got to know Mr. Bass about 16 years ago when I became general manager of Logan Telephone Cooperative, and I started attending NTCA meetings where Mr. Bass was general counsel at the time. And then I was lucky enough in 2007 to be elected by my peers to serve on the board of NTCA, and took that position in 2008 and served there for 6 years, and 4 years very closely with Mr. Bass in service on the board there. And with me being from Kentucky and Mr. Bass from Tennessee, we traveled together and started what I consider one of my fondest friendships in life. Mr. Bass has been a great influence on me due to his great character and his wit, and I have a great deal of admiration for him. But we started talking about doing an interview to film some segments for our 50th year celebration of our rural broadband pack, which Mr. Bass was influential in helping to start, and also involved in really being supportive of through his years at NTCA. And as we started working on the interview, I started thinking about all these conversations that Mr. Bass and I had had over the years. And when I was on the board in 2010 had asked Mr. Bass to write a history of the association, and he did that and documented that. And as you go back through that book, you'll notice that he's not mentioned very often in there. And to be fair, the history was really talking about the achievements of the association rather than individuals. But there's so many conversations I had with Mr. Bass over the years about situations that happened within the association and great stories that I wanted to include some of them as part of this interview as well. So for those of you all watching that don't know Mr. Bass, we're going to get to know him a little bit, and then I'll work through some questions about his involvement in NTCA. Good morning, Mr. Bass. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Fine. How are you this morning?
Hey, I'm doing well. It's great to come down to Carthage this morning and see you. You're looking really well. And how about you let our members know how you're feeling?
Well, I feel good this morning. I feel good most of the time. After I get up and get going, I can usually go pretty good every day. And knowing that you would be here today was extra incentive for me to get up and get going this morning.
And I know you're still in the office every day.
I'm in the office 5 days a week from 8 to 4, and I try to shuffle enough papers to keep busy most every day.
Well, that's great. It's good to see you again. We just want to take some time today to ask you a few questions and learn a little bit more about your involvement with NTCA and TECO and everything that you've done for rural telecom. But I wanted to start this morning just with there may be some people that are watching this that don't know you. You've been out of the industry and haven't been coming to the meetings for a while, and we have a lot of new people in the industry. So I wanted to start with just you taking some time to give them your background really before NTCA. You know, how you were raised, and what makes you the person you are today that got you established before NTCA.
Well, I am a native of Smith County, born across the river, a little town named New Middleton. I went to the public schools here in Smith County, Gordonsville High School. After high school, I went to college down at Lebanon at Cumberland University, and was at Cumberland University at the time of the outbreak of World War II. I am a veteran of World War II. I was in the Army Air Corps during the war. The Army Air Corps was a part, or was a branch at that time of the Army, and was not an independent branch of the service. I was a radio operator, mechanic, gunner on a B-17, a bomber, and served with the 8th Air Force in England. The 8th Air Force was the largest military component during World War II and probably ever assembled. It was our responsibility to take care and see that the German communications industry, bridges, transportation were all knocked out, so that would be an assist to the ground troops. And we'd also uh, help the ground troops if they called on us for help. We would help them. After the war, I took my discharge, came back home, and went back to school to finish my education. Went to Knoxville to University of Tennessee and finished my lower academic work. Got my bachelor's degree there, and then transferred down to Nashville to Vanderbilt. Got my law degree, and when I started practicing law, I was still single and had no responsibilities so far as families. And I always wanted just to be a private one person or two person practitioner. I practiced law in Nashville for a few years, and that was a good experience because I met a lot of good attorneys down there, and also got a lot of experience so far as the practice was concerned, and so far as later years. And after I married, after a few years, my wife and I came back to Smith County, and I've been here for all these many years. And in 1984, my son David went to law school and finished the law school, and came here, and he and I have been practicing together in a small environment since that time. And I'm still, as you say, I'm still active to the degree that I shuffle papers and do a few things in the office. I don't litigate anymore. I don't get out a lot and do a lot of running around. One of the reasons I quit, retired from the NTCA was I just couldn't travel like I once did. I saw the transition of flying from walking up to the counter, getting your ticket, and walking out and boarding the plane, to where you go through all of the requirements now to even get your ticket. And it's, as you've heard this before, it's not fun anymore. So I've had a transition there, as well as seeing a transition in the telecommunications industry, which has been a great transition.
Yeah. Well, I can still remember you running through the Minnesota airport probably at 89 or 90. So you were doing pretty well traveling, even when it got tough. But it did get much tougher. What about so how I know you've been involved with so many things in this community and really community involvement throughout here in Carthage and Tennessee. But how did you come to NTCA? How did you get to work for the rural telephone companies?
Well, at Smith County, uh, the industry was unknown. We had very poor telephone service except for Carthage and the surrounding area. At that time, the Bell Company, as a whole, that was before the breakout and the what we now know as the Bell system. Only Bell served a few customers outside of the city of Carthage or the town of Carthage. Over at Gordonsville, which is where my family had a large stake in the industry of trying to make a living, they needed a telephone company. They had one individual who owned the company. At the time in 1951, January of 1951, the big ice storm in this part of the state hit. All electric, telephone, utilities, they were on the ground. And the REA telephone program had just got underway and was started. Over at Alexandria, which is 15 miles from here, Congressman Joe Evans, who lived in that area, helped to get organized the DeKalb Telephone Cooperative, which brought together 6 or 7 communities into one system. After DeKalb got pretty well organized, but before they got service going, Gordonsville, with the individual, was still trying to cope with the what had happened. They had service. They had very limited service to Carthage, and that was about it. So the person that owned the system came to me and asked me if I would help him get a loan like they've got over at Alexandria. I told him I'd be glad to do so, but I thought that the better bet would be to see if they would buy you out and put you as a part of the cab. In the meantime, the cab had started their limited service. They were operating, and of course that was a big deal because they were on a new system, and it was working out very well. Even though a lot of it was 8-party service, that was no big deal because service was there. So the result was that we contacted Alexandria and the cab, and the answer came back: we'd be interested, but we've got to have money. Help us get money. At that time, the money was very limited, and you can imagine what we were looking for was money to start, and that was going on in about 49 other states. So we began trying to help get appropriations, hoping that part of the appropriations would come to us and we could help. And ultimately, we were successful. And I got you might say, my feet wet talking to people who were in the know and could help get money. And we did get a little bit increase in appropriations in Congress, and we were able to get part of that money. So we got enough money for the cab to buy the system at Gordonsville. And in the system at Gordonsville, in the contract, we wrote in there that Gordonsville would have one member on the board of directors. It occurred to me that that would be necessary to help maintain the Gordonsville name there, and it would be a large system, a larger system one of these days, which it has been. We did, and we got organized with the cab. The cab put the system in, and it never occurred to me except that the person who had been the owner of Gordonsville would be named the director. So it came time for the board of directors of the cab to name someone to fill the slot until the first election. And the owner of Gordonsville said, "Oh, no, I'm not going to take it. I've got too much to do. Let Bass take it," talking about me. So I took it expecting to serve an unexpired term of 1 year, and then someone else would take it. Well, that was not true. I was elected director there, and I saw the challenge 2 ways that I ran into. Number one, the challenge was more appropriations. Keep in mind this, that in the rural industry, in the rural communities, there was the electric program, there was the water program, there were programs vying for that money. And we had to work hard because there were other systems, other towns here within our reach that needed service. And we had to get to work, and we did. And very early on, I found myself going to Washington to testify before these congressional committees. But at any rate, we were successful in at least holding our own and getting slight improvements. And I served there for a few years, and then I transitioned over to being the general counsel. That was 1965.
1965.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
January 1965.
so NTCA kind of, the idea of NTCA kind of came out of NRECA.
It did.
And so how was that? Were you involved in that, those
was-
committees at
I
NRECA?
was not. I was not involved in the electric program. Uh, NRCA had been instrumental in helping lobby for the telephone loans program. The first act was the first act to put a rural telephone program in place was 1944, which would have been a separate agency. Congressman Pogue of Texas and Senator Hill of Alabama thought better to make a telephone program out of the REA, which was the agency which developed and was in charge of the electric program. And they were very instrumental because there were many NRECA electric members that were trying to do telephone loans also, or to establish independent telephone systems. And that came to pass in 1949 when the law was amended and made available funds for the electric and the telephone programs. Right. But out of that, the NRECA, the electric telephone program that had a very large membership, took it upon themselves to establish a telephone branch. And they had a small staff to work with the telephone people who were interested. And that went on as a adjunct of the electric program. And it was controversial because some of the NRECA members had no interest in the telephone program. Others did. And it led to those who favored having a telephone program to do their own. And that happened in 1964 with the help of NRCA. Enough interest was shown to organize the telephone program, NTCA, and that happened in 54. In June of 1954, the Articles of Incorporation were formed, and we became an association, right, as small as we were.
You started serving on the board of NTCA in 57, correct?
That's
so right. Your introduction, when did you first meet NTCA? It was between 54 when they were incorporated and 57, is that right?
It was during the time that we were trying to get some more money appropriated from Congress, and it was NTCA had no staff, and they were dependent on the officers or NRCA. At that time, the president of NTCA had been a member of the staff at REA, and he had some contacts that we were able to utilize to get a little help out of NREA, but more so, I was able to make a couple of contacts, and I got to know the president as well as a couple of the board members, and I, on a limited basis, knew who NTCA was.
Right. So then you were elected. You were the first Region 3 director in 1957. Is that right? How were you? How were you appointed or elected?
Well, really by the president. We were not even members of NTCA, And our friend there, who was the president, there was a meeting of the membership, which about 250 people came to Chicago to the meeting. And at that meeting, I remember it well, our friend who was the president of NTCA said, "Go back home, join the association, and I'll see that you are appointed." Well, I thought he was talking about our manager, who also was involved in all of this. And when it came time to appoint, I got the same answer. "Oh, no, I can't do it. You do it." And I expected to do it for until the next election. And the next election came where I got appointed.
Okay.
I got elected.
So what was the board work like? Like from 50, you became president 61, is that
I
right?
did.
So but before you became president, what was your role? What was the board meetings like? Was the focus was money, I guess, for about 3 decades from the 50s, but what was it like serving on the board of NTCA
The
in
focus,
in the late 50s?
the focus was money and keeping the small commercials out of the territory that obviously should be served by the cooperatives. Uh, the the states were not looking. I don't think. I don't think the states expected the rural telephone uh, program to sponsor and to do like it did and to grow like it did. And these small commercial companies were all the time trying to expand their territory. See, REA would not make a loan to any territory that was served by another entity. And the result was that these small commercials would branch out, not expecting to serve, but say, "This is my territory. You can't come in here."
Or they would serve the lower cost areas?
That's right, if they could. That's right. And we had that plus appropriations. Those were the two big deals. And actually, before I became president, I had become one of the spokesmen before Congress. I began going before Congress. Our friends told us to get up there and let us know who you are. And that's what we tried to do.
Yeah. So NTCA still had no staff at the time. You were still borrowing staff members from NRECA some.
That's right. NRCA had what they called a telephone coordinator, I believe his title was, which meant that part of his time was spent on telephone. And he had his secretary, of course. And he and she helped do a lot of the work, as well as to put out a short, brief newsletter to let us know what was going on. Membership then, as I recall, was about 100.
Right.
Some maybe not even 195.
So and then you're elected to be president of the association in 61.
1961.
How did that come about? Why did they select you?
I think because I had been going up there and doing some things to help doing the work, and in the meantime, we had appointed had put one member of the staff on, so we had a one-person staff there, and I got
Who was that?
Morton Langstaff, and he and I became working. We began working together.
Where'd Morton come from?
Morton was a Kentucky boy, a Paducah, Kentucky boy, and he was in Washington working with the government, had a government job, G14, I think he was, whatever a G14 is, but he was working with the government at the time and had some knowledge of the telephone and REA programs.
So, describe what it was like being the president of NTCA from '61 to '64. How much were you in? How many times were you going to Washington? What were you doing? How much of your time? You were still trying to run a business here at home and have a family, things like that. But how much time was NTCA taking up when you were president?
Well, at the time, going to hearings, and we we always, and I primarily made the hearings because we were advised it's best if one of your members testifies and not some paid employee in Washington. So I made every hearing, I think, uh, in every year, as well as working on the regional meetings. As president, I tried to make at least 2 or 3 regional meetings because we knew that if we get the people to the regionals, they would get to the national and get more interest. So going to meetings and testifying before Congress took out most of the time that I had until 62.
Till 1962.
In 1962 was when April 16th. I'm one of these that gets my income tax return back in those days, filed on April the 15th. I had finished and I, for some unknown reason, felt that I knew how to file my own income tax. So I got that thing filed on the 15th, and on the 16th, I was trying to get papers thrown away and get organized. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was Morton Langstaff saying, I've resigned. And I said, oh, you have? When? As of today. And I said, you can't do that. He said, I've already done it. So it caused me to have to put down my papers, quit shuffling papers, get to Washington, and make arrangements to keep the office open. That meant we had one employee. We had 2 employees at the time, Morton and one person who was, we called the administrative assistant. So I made arrangements to keep the office open and made arrangements to start advertising for a replacement. And we still have those hearings. We hadn't finished those hearings at that time. So between April the 16th, when Morton left, and August the 1st, when Dave Fullerton came on board, I spent too much time in Washington. I was out of my league, but I was on the plane, going and coming, very much during that period of time. I spent a lot of time trying to keep the association together.
Right. And what led the board to hire Mr. Fullerton? You'll talk about his background before he came to NTCA.
Yes, we advertised. I think we got maybe 12 or 13, 14 applications, which I pared down to about 8, as I recall. And then, with the help of a couple of board members, which I kept anonymous, they did not know what their role was. We were able to get down to 2, and we interviewed 2, David Fullerton and another. David Fullerton at the time was the assistant engineer, I believe he was called the assistant engineer at NRCA, and had been there a couple of years.
And he'd been doing some legislative work too.
He'd been doing some legislative work also. And to me, he had one of the best interviews. And I had narrowed it down to 2 to interview. Reluctantly, I felt that we had to do something, and to bring in 4 or 5 to interview was unheard of in one day or 2 days. So we interviewed 2, and the board was impressed with Fullerton, and he was employed and that was in the last of June, and he felt necessary to give a notice to NRCA that he was leaving, and we set August the 1st as the date, although he felt he could do a little moonlighting on the side, which he did.
Right.
And we had, at the time, the REA Act there was amendment before the Congress to amend the REA Act to permit cable television to be included in the loans. REA took a very close look at the whole thing and said, we can't make telephone loans. You've got to go to Congress and get the act amended, which we had filed to do so. Among our opponents on the Hill were the members of the National Broadcasting Association, big broadcasters. They opposed it. They saw it as a threat. So we were up against the wall.
So so it's you, Mr. Fullerton, and an administrative assistant fighting against the broadcasters at that time.
We did. And the Cable Television Association opposed it. We were fighting a losing battle. I've spent a lot of time on that.
And then, you continued to serve as president through '64, and then they transitioned to general counsel for the association in '65. How did that occur?
Well, I just couldn't do it anymore. I had spent too much time. In the meantime, I had a family. I had a business to run. I had my law practice. I couldn't do it. So I proposed. It was my proposal that we had a general counsel at the time, and he was like me. He had enough to do at home,
Right.
and I talked to him, and he had no problem. So I did not expect to go for 50 years, but at any event, I had to get out from the board and being the president.
So then we get about 4 years later, getting back to TICO and the Political Action Committee. It was formed in January 25th, 1969, which is about 4 months before I was born. So
Okay.
TICO's celebrating 50 years in January.
Yep.
You know what birthday I've
Yep,
got coming up
I do.
in May then.
I
So,
do.
but what was the motivation for creating TICO? Why did you all feel like a political action
Well,
committee was necessary?
We were fighting the giants of the industry. At that time, keep in mind that Bell had not been separated. There were several active independents, and they were all going to Congress looking for something. Whatever they wanted, they were there. And very little interest was being shown in the small independents that we have now, or the commercial, or the cooperatives. In my dealings with Congress and with the other associations, I saw that if we were going to be a player in the industry, you had to have a political action committee. And we began, and Fullerton he recognized that before I did. And we began working to that end. And that was before the present law was passed that created the Federal Elections Commission. We were governed back then of the Federal Action Committee or something. It was a different the Corrupt Practices Act was what it was. That was the industry that the agency that took care of these, and it was sort of a loosely structured law. But we felt the need to go ahead and get organized, which we did on January the 25th, 1969. was when we adopted the Articles of Association and the bylaws and so forth.
So, do you remember what you had to do to become a member when TICO first started?
Well, we set up in the bylaws, as I remember, we set up the all-star. You can become an all-star by to be a one-star. You had to give up to $100 to $1,000, I guess it was. Most of the contributions were less than that. You had a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, and a all-star. The all-star was 365 days, a dollar a day, but most of the contributions were smaller than $100. But we did have a few all-stars, me being one of them.
Okay, Mr. Bass, in your history book, you talk about the first contribution that TICO ever made after TICO was established. Do you mind sharing that story with our viewers today?
That was to Ed Jones. We organized the pack on Saturday. On Sunday, his congressman died. He went back home from the annual meeting. He went back home, attended the funeral, and then unofficially became a candidate for Congress until they could get the election called. And we made our contribution, $1,000 to Ed Jones, to friends of Ed Jones, immediately thereafter. We became the first contributor to his election. And to carry it on a little bit further, Ed Jones was elected to Congress after a hard fight. Ed had Democratic. They had a Democratic election. He was successful in that, and then the general election. And in the general election, he had opposition from the Republican Party and also whatever they called the other party that was going in, the American Independent Party or whatever that had been organized and was going pretty full. And they sent all stars into the district to campaign. But Ed was successful and served until, I guess, 1989, and I don't believe he had any serious opposition after that.
Yeah, well. So once Tico stepped in, everybody was just kind of scared to run against him, I guess. But
I guess so.
sounds like first contribution was a good one.
It was well placed.
Got off to a good start. What about the first president of Tico? What do you remember about Mr. Jameson?
Well, Bob was not the first president. The first president was Gene Britt of Georgia, and then he was about the 5th president. Yes, I can tell you, we had members.
Let me re-ask that question. What about just the early leadership in TICO? Who do you remember about being the most influential leaders when TICO was first established?
Well, I'd have to give that to Henry McNeil of South Carolina. Henry was a director of his local electric cooperative also. The electric cooperatives had, and still has, a very organized, influential pack. Henry was a member of that pack, and he knew the value of that pack and the necessity that to be effective in Congress, we had to have a pack. And Henry made that known to all who would listen to him. Bob Jameson was the general manager of the cooperative, of which Henry was the president. So Henry, Ori Telephone, and Henry got Bob interested. Bob was the first chairman of the TICO. Bob, in return, made telephone calls to different managers or people that he knew in other companies, and they spread the word through that means to begin with. So I would guess within a few days after we organized that we had well over 100 members. But then it tapers off. But Henry McNeil recognized, and until his dying day, was a member of the PAC, and he spread the word.
Big support. What about through the next 50 years of TICO that we've had since the organization? Who else stands out through the years as just really champions for the PAC?
Well, there's been a lot. I hesitate to name names because we've had a lot who have done so. I back up just a little bit. Up in the northeast, northwest, in the Dakotas and Minnesota, they have all up there. They've had a number up there who have been champions. They've always led the pack. If you want money, they've got members who are willing to go to bat. So it's a whole bunch up there. We've had several in the southeast, which I'm familiar with, such as my friend Trevor Bonstetter up in Kentucky. Trevor has been a champion in this part of the country. But we've had so many members, I hesitate to name them all. But we have had people who have come forward and who have stepped forward. I've had, and I'll say this on behalf of Tennessee, we've had good support from Tennessee. You can always depend, though, that the Dakotas and Minnesota are going to be first, second, third, and maybe Tennessee fourth. Yes, and Kentucky's always been up there.
Well, we try to make up some ground, but we definitely wish some of that North Dakota spirit, the Dakota spirit, would become a little bit more contagious, don't you?
Right. I hope it does. And here in Tennessee, and I think this has been followed and copied, we started having once a year a legislative day, TICO event, and where we would bring in someone to talk about the necessity, talk about what we're doing and what needs to be done, maybe throw in some state issues that we have a legislature that likes to meet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year now, and know what's going on in Nashville, you know. Yeah. But
well, I think that event's been very successful in bringing more people into the PAC and bringing donations up in Tennessee especially. What other type of advice would you give to the participants today that they should take to try to get more people involved in the PAC?
Is to talk to their neighbors who are not members and emphasize to them the absolute necessity. If we're going to be a player in the industry, we've got to have a PAC. And we've got to do that because whether we like it or not, that is part of the culture today that is in the industry. And if they think that we can get by without a PAC, they're mistaken. And if we do not have someone up there representing us and being a part of the industry itself up there where the action is, we're going to lose a battle.
Yeah. Amen. I think that's absolutely true. I've heard that speech before at several Region 3 breakfasts over the years.
You probably have.
You've always been a passionate advocate. Is that what really drives you to be such an advocate, is just because you know if we I think we often hear if you're not at if you're not at the table, then you're lunch or something like that. Is that what has driven your passion over the years? Just knowing if we're not there, that there'll be bad results.
It's something I learned 50 years ago. I was told that, and if I did not do it, if we did not do it then, he said, you're going to be left out.
Yeah.
And I've had that for 50 years. I've tried to drive that home, that for us to be a player at the table, we've got to be there as a pack. And you cannot do it individually. James Bass himself cannot go to Washington and get in the door hardly. You've got to be part of that industry and become a player in the industry. I've been to a few of the receptions up there, and I've seen the others who are there, and they are the giants of the industry.
Other than that first contribution that was made, do you have a special memory about a contribution that you made on behalf of TICO or the PAC to a specific congressman through the years?
Not really. I've given a few contributions privately to other PACs, but they've always been small. For example, I've given Ed Jones a contribution, or his PAC, Friends of Ed Jones, contributions through the years, and other congressmen. But I've always tried to give them $365 a year to TICO. I've been an all-star for 50 years.
50 years.
And I'll send my contribution then the 15th of this month. I pay my fourth annual installment to IRS, and I'll send my PAC contribution there.
Yeah, well, that's a great legacy, Mr. Bass. What about 50 years from now? If whoever comes after us, what would you, if they're celebrating their TICO, or which is the NTCA, the Rural Broadband PAC now is the title of the PAC, or the name of the PAC, what do you hope they're celebrating 50 years from now at their 100th year anniversary?
Well, I hope, first of all, that there would be some election reform to get rid of some of these mega $1 million to where we are still a player at the table. But if I can visualize it, which is hard to do, if I can visualize it, we still, the rural telephone program will still be thriving 50 years from now. We'll still be rural, and we'll still be into telecommunications. We're not the same old telephone company we were 50 years ago. We're now a telecommunications. We've got a lot of things going, and we'll have our PAC, and it will be a player in the industry, because those leaders of ours will see the necessity then, just as we have seen the necessity over this past 50 years.
Right. And 100% participation of members, right?
And 100% participation. Going back to Henry McNeil and the electrics, I'll guarantee you they'll have, among those who are eligible for participation, I'll guarantee you they have 99% participation, because it's part of their culture. It's what they understand to be, and they don't have to be asked to be. They walk up to the table and they make that contribution,
Right.
such as we do at Nashville. When we have our annual contribution there.
Well, I hope so too. I hope we can see much greater participation in the future.
We've got to.
Yep, that's right. But kind of moving on past TICO, some other things with the association. The first NTCA legislative conference wasn't until 1971. So there's about a a 20-year period there wasn't any really an organized meetings. Of course, over those years, staff really started to build in the 70s and the 80s where the association could do more. But how was, other than just you or the board or the executive vice president working in Washington, how were the members involved in Washington before we started having formal legislative conferences and fly-ins and things like that?
Well, there was two ways. First of all, and I alluded to that a little bit, of going up on your own and trying to knock on doors. But really, Minnesota had a day that they went to Washington, and all of the members went, all of the cooperatives went, and they went to see their congressmen and their senators, and in an organized fashion. So that was really the impetus for getting organized to do what we did then after the 1971, and it's been very effective because, as you know, you go to Washington, everybody and his brother has someone up there organized to go and see their congressmen or their senators. So it's been very effective, or more effective, in trying to go one-on-one and organized without organization, really. But we have been pretty effective because staff spends a lot of time setting up those meetings and then following up on questions that some member of Congress may ask.
And then about after 22 years of service, Mr. Fullerton decided to retire,
Yes.
and then we had a transition from Mr. Fullerton to Mr. Brunner.
Brunner.
Do you have any memories about that transition, or about anything about Mr. Fullerton you'd want to add that we hadn't talked about?
Well, Fullerton was a driver. He would drive the board, and he had a lot of programs that he visualized that drove the board and that were effective and helped to visualize the future. He visualized the future. And as you probably know, both him and Mike Brunner served longer than most general managers or executive vice presidents or whatever we may call them has to do. And he decided that his time had been served and that he would move on somewhere else. And the board went through an extensive organization trying to organize to get a new executive. I think they called him the executive vice president.
That's right.
Then.
That's right.
And they spent 2 days, and I alluded to this when I was trying to take a few interviews for the NTCA. They spent 2 days on interviews, and that's a lot of interviews. Right. And the outcome was, I think they settled on 3, and they brought those 3 in at a meeting to decide which one of the 3 was the most effective. Right. And I can tell you a little incident which I think helped Mike Brunner. At the time of the interviews, they also had a reception. You got to have a reception, you know. And I noticed, and I did not know Mike Brunner at that time. I noticed that Mike Brunner went around. He was making sure to say a word to the board members, right? Because he knew they were going to be the one who was going to do the voting.
Smart guy, right?
Smart guy.
Yeah.
And let me say that we had several good people who applied, and Mike came from the government and from the Farmers Home Administration, I believe is where he was was working at the time,
All right.
and he knew the government pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I know that through Mr. Fulton, Mr. Brunner, both, the association just grew exponentially
That's
in
right.
membership and revenues. And of course, you had the group health program, the retirement security program, which is so critical to all our members and our
that's right.
companies now. So, a lot of progress there, I know. Um, also, during that time, we started thinking about the Foundation for Rural Service.
Yeah.
And in 2019, we'll celebrate the 25th anniversary of the foundation. So, do you have any memories of the organization of the
Yes.
foundation, why it was organized, and the early
Yes.
organization of the foundation?
In the IRS or somewhere in the government, we wanted to do different things, bring different people in to speak and to give scholarships and do a lot of different things. And there were some IRS regulations hid down there somewhere. You can't do that. You know, you violate your charter, and you can't do that. So we organized the foundation to take care of being able to do a lot of things that we were not able to do otherwise. And it's been very effective. We have brought people in. For an example, we couldn't carry a congressman out to the district to show him what a telephone cooperative looked like. Oh no, you can't do that. But the foundation has been very effective and has done those things which we wanted to do, and we've had to more or less, just like TICO, is to operate it separately from the association itself.
There's no doubt. Foundation's doing some great work today. You talk about those congressional visits, all the scholarships, the
Yep.
educational papers,
That's
and
right.
all of especially a lot of our associate members have got really involved there at the foundation and been supportive of those
That's right.
of those things. It's been great. So that was a great choice to start the foundation. Can you believe the foundation's 25 years old already?
It's hard to.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? Um, I mentioned earlier, I think, that one of the great privileges of my life is serving on the NTCA board, and we got to do a lot of that together as you were general counsel, and I was the Region 3 director. I got to travel a little bit since I was from Kentucky and Tennessee. I got to see you run through airports and
Yep.
see Mount Rushmore with my wife. I've got a great picture of you and my wife at Mount Rushmore.
How about that?
Just some great memories. And toward the end of that, we got to do some interesting things. We got to bring Shirley back home after Mike retired. I wonder if what are your first memories of Shirley when she started with the association the first time?
Shirley was an employee there back in the 90s, and my recollection of Shirley was that she was very thorough, and that she was very efficient, and was knew what she was talking about, and I knew that Shirley would not stay with. I didn't think that Shirley would stay with the association because I felt that she would go to other pastures because she was very knowledgeable.
And talented, right?
And when she came back, I was not surprised.
Yeah. Well, I know it was great. We got to be part of some of those interviews and
Yeah,
stuff.
that's
Very extensive interviewing process
Yeah.
again, even though we probably knew that Shirley was the leading candidate going in. And then we took on the Old Pasco unification a little bit and
Yeah.
kind of some of your, other than writing your history book, you poured over a lot of bylaws and we learned the difference between merger and unification because of the District
Yeah.
of Columbia, some pretty extensive legal work there at the
Yeah.
end before you retired. But
Speaking of Shirley, I'm not sure how many board members were on the board when she was there before, and those who were there when they reemployed her 4 years ago, I guess it was now. 1910, she came back.
8
Yeah.
years ago.
8
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, well, she announced that she was leaving NTCA right. I think at the same meeting I was elected to take on Region Three. So
Oh,
she ran off as soon as but I was still on the board. There
yeah,
were, there were a
yeah,
few there on the
yeah.
board. She wasn't gone that long.
Not hardly.
No,
Okay, all right.
but so then at the age of 91, I think you retired as general counsel from. Is that right? Were you 91 when you retired?
When I don't remember. I retired in 13, I think, 2013, I guess. Uh,
I think it's like 12, 13
I think
transition.
some-
That's
right
right.
there, yeah. Well, I felt I'd been there a long time.
Well, you'd been doing something with the association for 55 years, I think. Is that
I
right?
think that's
55
right.
years at the time
And
you retired.
as I say, travel is not fun like it used to be, and running through airports was not my cup of tea anymore. And besides that, I had some things I needed to do back home, and I just was pressing myself at.
Well, I can attest you were just as sharp as ever when you retired from the board. But I wonder, looking back over that 55 years, if there are one or two things. If I know you are one of the most humble, and you've got so much humility. You never want to brag on anything that you've done. But I wonder, looking back over those 55 years, are there one or two things that really stand out that you feel like were most impactful for the rural telecom industry? Things that you were able to accomplish during that 55 years.
Well, yes,
There were so many, but
yes. Let's back up and talk about NTCA. When Fullerton came on board, I had been at the association there a lot of the 4 months before, and it was my opinion that we had to move forward. And to move forward, we had to put a program together that would entice members to join, potential members to join, and the members there to be enthused. So when Fullerton was employed, I came up here. He was employed, and I said, Dave, I got to go home. I'll do something. I'll come back, and we'll talk. So I think I had been here only one time during the month of July after the board met. On August 1st, or whatever it was that he came on board, I came up here. And we went to the hotel that night to talk. It had been sort of a hectic day, and we decided to go to the hotel and have dinner and talk. And I told him, I said, Dave, I'll get back up here as quick as I can, but I've got a lot going on my plate at home. But you think, and I'll think, we've got to get a program together that would be responsive to the members and one that the members will embrace. And I came back up here later, and we went to the hotel that night, and we put together the ingredients of what was known as a program for progress. Now, the program for progress was an ambitious a program that, number one, employed more people. Number two, put ourselves doing a lot of things that we had not been doing. But number three would cause a dues increase. And we decided to hone that together, and then to come back in later and take a look at it, which we did. And then based upon that, we took that to the board for their endorsement when the board met in June, I think it was. The board endorsed it. The first regional meeting, and agreed to take it to the membership at the regional meetings. The board endorsed it. We took it to the region 1, 2, and 3. Not a single negative vote. We didn't have a single negative vote in that whole thing. It was unanimous. And I think in my own mind that program for progress, even though it was very small compared to what happened later, that program for progress gave the impetus for the association to start growth. I think another thing that was important for us was taking the benefit programs and putting it under our own umbrella, where we were not responsible to someone else, but that we were doing our own programs. I think that was very important. So far as the industry was concerned, I think that after, I guess about 1979 was when we began to branch out. I think the industry itself began to see that we were a player in the industry, and that even though they did not want us to be around, we were there, and we were now. 79 would be 25 years. About then, they recognized us as a player in the industry, and from then on, we were at the table, and we have been at the table very much since that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mr. Bass, I appreciate all your time. You've been very gracious. I appreciate Barry and North Central Telephone coming and bringing the equipment and filming us today. But before we go, is there any other thing that you'd like to tell the members of NTCA or the association? Anything we hadn't talked about today that you'd like to share?
Well, it's been a great ride, one that I am glad to have been a part of. I've met some of the finest rural people that is in the nation, from the places I've been and having associated with these people involved in the rural telephone industry. They recognized the industry as being important to them and to their communities, and we've had a good time together, and I've appreciated it, and I appreciate all of the courtesies that have been extended to me over the years, and for me to say, yes, 1957, I expected to stay around for 55 years. I didn't, but it was something that I enjoyed doing, and I had a good learning. I have learned a lot about the telephone industry, and I think that the things that we did to assist in the industry has been lasting, and it shows now. It's no question. We're no longer what I call rural. We are now a part of the overall industry, and we are respected in the industry, and we are a part. I might say this on another thing that happened to me at the time that we had this transition in 1962, 63, right through there. We had no water service on the rural area here, south side of the river, and it had been talked about for several years, and but no one did anything. So one day, my brother and I decided that something needed to be done, and let's do it. And I got involved in that also, and not that I put it in by myself, but I got busy, and about the same time, we got this loan and grant to put a water system in. And we had, when the loan was approved, we had 90 days to get it under construction. Now, I had all the other going in addition to this, but I got it put together. And we're celebrating 50 years now, and it's been a success. And as of December the 31st, I had been the counsel for the water system, for all this time. And as of December the 31st, which was 3 days ago, I was out.
You're out of a job.
Yeah, it was time for me to leave.
Well, Mr.
But I've enjoyed it all.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Bass, I just want to say on behalf of the Rural Broadband Pack Board, and I think I can speak for all the NTCA members and our communities and our all the customers that we serve. I think you probably don't understand the impact that you've made throughout rural America on telecom. The things that you've done, helping start the association, helping start the PAC, healthcare, retirement, anything that NTCA does, you've kind of had your finger on or been a part of for 50 years. So I just want to say thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for those sacrifices in the 60s when you had family and water systems, everything you were doing, and the program for progress and helping kickstart the association. And I hope you know that you have our prayers, our admiration, our respect, and we just count you as one of our greatest blessings in life.
Well, thank you, Greg. Well, I had a very supportive family. My wife and my children and my whole family have been very supportive. And they've enjoyed the association that they've had. They've met some fine people too, and they've enjoyed being around. And they have been very supportive of me as I would have to make some of these trips. And I've appreciated the fact that they were supportive. Without the supportive family, as you know, you just can't do it. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, we've both been blessed there. Well, thank you again, Mr. Bass. It's great visiting with you.
Thank you. Thank you.